I'm very delighted to introduce our guest today, who is Tamar Bhatt Yehudit. And she grew up in an Orthodox Jewish home in South Africa. Moving to Israel and marrying young, she gave birth to her first child at age 19. 12 years and 2 more children later, she experienced a sudden spiritual awakening, which catapulted her out of her old life and onto a new path of devotion to sacredness and truth. Today, she lives with her partner in their organic food forest. When she isn't taking care of her children, she is engaged in yoga and meditation practices, farming, and writing. So I met Tamar in an interesting way. I believe she came across my book. I'm not sure which happened first, but I have the book Edge of Grace that she read, and we connected over Facebook. We have many things in common. And because of those similarities, I felt she would be perfect to bring onto the program early, given that she is a mother and she's living the life of a mother with children. So that's always an interesting story. And she has a passion for how spiritual awakening unfolds in the life of parenting, as well as a passion for all bodies and the female process, specifically around fertility. And these are things that we can speak about more as the conversation unfolds. And you're going to learn much more about Tamar and her unfolding. So I'm going to bring her on right now. Welcome, Tamar.
Hi.
Hi. So good to have you here. Thank you for receiving this information and joining so readily.
Thank you. It's so wonderful to be here, Prajna. Thank you for your book and all the wonderful work that you do. I feel very grateful to be here with you.
Oh, wonderful. Yes. So there are so many things that we can speak about. And how I would like to begin is one thing that you sent to me was your story that you wrote so beautifully, a story of transformation. And how that story starts out is half of your life you had spoken about experiencing depression and having suicidal thoughts and things like that. And it was a very challenging time for you prior to this awakening unfolding that started to begin for you. So what I'm curious about, and I'm sure our listeners will be, is what was your early life like? Like, what do you think attributed itself to depression and coming to a place of wanting to commit suicide? And obviously that didn't happen. But let's hear a little bit about your early life and how that all started out for you.
Okay. Well, like you said in the introduction, I grew up in South Africa in an Orthodox Jewish home. And actually, from a very young age, I had sort of a conflict between the things that I was being taught in the religion and the things that I really felt inside of myself. And one of them was actually around modesty. There were many rules when I was growing up as a very small girl about how you have to cover up your body. And there was almost a sense of danger. Um, and this was also combined with living in South Africa, which is not a very safe place to live. So there was kind of a sense of fear around the body and around sexuality. And inside of myself, even as a small child, I felt a tremendous freedom. I would try as much as I could to spend time alone. And when I was alone, I felt like I have me. I have these feelings, I have these intuitions, a sense of wonder and bliss and curiosity. And I felt that there was a real inner guidance that was just inherent, even as a very little child. But the message I was getting from outside was that there are very strict and important rules that need to be followed. So there was confusion. There was a lot of confusion, and a lot of taboo around the body and around autonomy and those kind of things. I can tell you one little story, which was, I think I was about 8 or 9 years old, and there was one specific holiday where the Torah scrolls, the Bible scrolls, are taken out of their sacred place, and everyone dances with them. But in the community where I was living, the men and the women are kept very, very separate. So when we were very small girls, we would be allowed to go to the men's section and dance with the Torah. And I think I was 8 or 9 years old, and it was just like at that age where it was maybe the last year that I would be allowed to be in the men's section and really dance and be with the Torah scrolls. And I was on somebody's shoulders, and I remember that my skirt rode up all the way. And there was this moment of shame, and someone reached over and pulled my skirt down to cover my knees. And I remember so vividly this feeling of danger, that there was something dangerous about being exposed. And there was a lot of pain around it and conflict about, am I really something pure and wonderful to be celebrated, or is there something actually dangerous and forbidden about me?
So at a certain age then, in the religious perspectives, something changed at a certain age, and then okay, so what particular teaching was this?
They actually call it sniut, which means modesty, which is something so beautiful. There's something precious about protecting what's precious. Yes. But for me, the way I absorbed the messages wasn't something precious. It was something dangerous.
And then at a certain age, there's a separation between the men and the women?
Even from a small age, there's a separation, and it becomes further and further separated as the kids get older and older.
So would you say that you started to, like, you felt there was this something really authentic bubbling up in you, a joy, a celebration, and did you learn in a way not to trust that and suppress it? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is part of the way that I absorbed the religion that I was being taught, was that there are very strict rules to be followed, and what you feel doesn't necessarily matter.
So what happened with you then with your feelings? Like, when did you begin to notice depression or the other kinds of challenges? How did that show up for you in your day-to-day life, in your family, in your community?
Well, it was in my early teenage years that I really began to withdraw. But like I mentioned earlier, I actually really enjoyed being alone. So even though I was suffering from depression and kept to myself a lot, at the same time, I felt like I had a secret treasure, that when I'm alone, I have a certain access to something beautiful and free that I don't necessarily have when I'm interacting with other people. So it was kind of two things happening at the same time. And one of my big concerns was that other people were worried about me. But actually, I felt okay. I felt like there's something important that's happening here, and it's meaningful.
So there was still a portal of connecting to something important, something precious. It was still available to you.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So when did you start? So you had your first child very young, was age 19?
Yeah, so I grew up in South Africa until the age of 18, at which point I moved to Israel. I met the father of my children. We got married really young. And I was completely unprepared for life in Israel, which was very, very different than South Africa. And the religious life in Israel is amplified greatly from the lifestyle that I grew up in, which was more balanced. I still had a lot of secular culture in my life. But when I moved to Israel, all of that just didn't exist anymore. I moved into a very insular, ultra Orthodox community and became pregnant with my first baby, which was a wonderful experience. The pregnancy was wonderful. I felt very deeply connected to this life that was growing inside of me. The birth was really a wonderful experience. I had a birth teacher who was a really gifted woman, who is a really gifted woman. And the main message that she was teaching us about birth was that it's a process of surrender.
Huh.
There is not very much you can do to predict what's going to happen in your birth. She educated us about everything that could happen, but she was very clear that ultimately your body is your guide, and the more you just surrender to that process, the better it will be. And moreover, she also taught us that this is really a lesson in motherhood itself, that you're not in control. You give birth to this child and they're no longer inside of you. And you're just there to witness them and love them and take care of them as best you can. But ultimately, you're not in control of this person's life.
Hmm.
Um,
So you had the support then, it sounds like really great support of a birthing teacher. So how was that, like when you said an Orthodox environment for our listeners? Can you just say a little bit more about that transition into Israel and the environment being very Orthodox? Excuse me. Did that context, did that interfere at all or support in any way? Because your husband at the time was an Orthodox practicing Jew, is that correct?
yeah, very
So
much.
how was that? Like, was there conflict in that, or was it supportive of what your birthing teacher was gifting you with as far as surrender and letting go into your own body, trusting the wisdom of your body? So what was that dynamic like?
Well, in a way, I was caught between two worlds because, on the one hand, I was living in a certain environment that I didn't trust and I didn't feel was nourishing for me. Um, my ex-husband was very committed to his learning schedule and the community from which I felt extremely alienated.
Mm,
And then there were kind of these little treasures, like my birth teacher, where I suddenly would see, aha, here's someone who's kind of approaching things the way I would intuitively want to approach things, which is with a spontaneity and with a deep appreciation for the body and using the body as a guide. And there was a kind of a shift in my marriage when my ex-husband saw that I knew what I was doing.
mm,
You know, during the pregnancy and especially during the birth, he was like, oh, like, you know something that I don't know. There's something here that's worth trusting and watching and supporting. And he was actually a great support in the births. But in terms
wonderful.
of our lifestyle and um, especially as my oldest son grew and we wanted different things for him, there was a lot of conflict around that, which really was about my inner conflict between being in a lifestyle that I had been raised in, yet feeling inside like there's something wrong. And this was really one of the very deep core issues that caused me so much depression and pain and conflict and actually depleted me in a very deep way.
Mm-hmm. So when you say core belief, say a little more about that. So would you say that was around the shame that you were speaking about earlier? Something being wrong that needs to be hidden and covered up, related to just your authentic expression as a body?
Yeah, exactly. This is like a belief that I was raised with, um, is a sense of what's appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, well,
And
it's really great that you say that because, well, you know this and being a mother and having three children, and then you had your own upbringing. But what's the two most important things are the comfort and the capacity to be able to attach, to have an attachment with a trusted human being, usually the mother. And then the second is to be able to have your authentic expression.
yeah,
So, and I'm just curious, how was your own relationship with your mother or your parents? And
mhm,
and I just want to ask that because I know as we move forward, we're going to talk about your children and how it is that you're parenting right now, and what your how your awakening has informed that. So, can we hear just a little bit about your own attachment with in your environment, what that felt like with your family? And we're hearing now about this a little, this suppression of your authentic expression and really carrying some shame.
yeah.
So, how about you speak about that for a bit?
Well, actually, one of my favorite things to speak about is my own mother, because she is
Mhm.
an incredibly kind and wonderful and wise woman. And somehow, even though she was actually trying to teach me a certain framework, and she was trying to teach me this is the right way and this is the wrong way, I kind of absorbed something much deeper from her, which was an unconditional love and acceptance and approval. So there was a certain seed that was planted, um, in me from my mother, which was just love, just pure maternal love. And the layer on top of that was kind of, this is the right way, this is the wrong way, this is what I would like for you. But that kind of never registered as deeply as how much I'm really loved and cared about.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, it's something that I'm very, very grateful for. And I still am very grateful for. She's a person who I intuitively and instinctively just tell the truth to.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Still have a close relationship with her.
very much, even though, as we speak more about my story, it will become more apparent how challenging that was. But yeah, there is a certain bond between a mother and a child that I've seen through my own mother to me and through me to my own children, that has a certain quality that's just unbreakable.
Mm. Yes, yes. Okay. So why don't we go to that now? What precipitated the separation between you and your husband? Now, was this after having three children? So you had your first child at 19, and then when did the next two come?
My second son was born 3.5 years after that. And then my daughter was another 2 years later. So by the time I was 25, I had three children.
Hmm.
Um, and it was a very challenging time. It was a very, very challenging time.
Did
When
you
I read your book,
did you have the same birthing teacher? Like
yeah,
I'm assuming that you had a home birth. Is that correct?
no, I actually gave birth in the hospital to all three of my children in a mother and baby clinic.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things that happened for me during my births was, I really got in touch with, a certain power inside of me, and was able to express it in a way that the midwives, they kind of took a step back.
They kind of
It,
what? Say that again?
they took a step back.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
had midwives with you. So in the medical system there, like you said, you went to a hospital. So midwives are still very involved in the birthing process.
Yeah, in this specific hospital, they have a separate ward that's considered like a mother and baby clinic.
Uh-huh.
And they do have special rooms with birthing balls and different tools. And there's a possibility to bring in your own birth coach. So
Uh-huh.
there is some flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, there was a moment in the birth of my daughter where actually the head midwife was the one delivering her, and she was laughing. She was like, "You don't need any help." And there's a certain power in of surrender, like I was speaking about in giving birth, that when we're able to get in touch with that, there's a tremendous channeling that happens, and ultimately that's really the lesson of
Mm-hmm.
birth. Whether we give birth or we're given birth to, it's
Mm.
we have that somewhere.
So would you say that in that surrender that you're surrendering to your own intelligence, that innate intelligence in your body? I mean, I remember when I gave birth, I have three children also, and I remember so just a trust that came over me in the process of, I don't really even know how to articulate it, but that there's a greater intelligence happening here. Like this body knows what to do, and so does the baby. Like birthing knows how to happen, not by. I mean, of course, at certain times, external supports are needed, but my birth happened very quickly for my first child at home. The midwife barely made it in the door to catch her. And my partner thought he was going to have to, and he was quite nervous about that. But she just kind of came out so easily. But there was definitely an intelligence engaging the entire process. So the surrendering was to that. But like I don't remember that being a willful choice. It just happened. Would you say that that was the same for you or
I
similar?
think that the choice happened way before the birth. The choice was during the pregnancy when I felt such a deep inner connection to this child that was growing inside of me, that the surrender was to really listening
Mm,
to the process that was happening, to listening and to trusting it. By the time the birth happened, the hormones are taking over, and you're as ready as you've become. So yeah.
yeah, good. So all three children were full term. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Good. Okay, so it was challenging because there was some things going on between you and your partner, and there was a culture that you were living in, and at a certain point, separation happened.
Yeah, there was definitely a buildup of tension over many years where I didn't experience the relationship as particularly nourishing. And at the same time, I was taking care of three small children with like full devotion. So I just became more and more exhausted over time. I also experienced feeling very afraid for them, when they would leave the house. Especially here in Israel, the kids are quite independent.
Hmm.
And the fear led to an attempt to control, which led to anger, which led to depression. So there was there was a lot of challenge in the relationship and in the parenting and in the lifestyle. And over time, it just became compounded, with all the stresses of life. And at a certain point, I met my teacher.
Uh-huh.
Um, a friend took me to work in her garden one day, and
Uh-huh.
that's how I met her. And I had never been exposed to gardening or, natural healing or anything sacred that really touched me. Even though I'd grown up in this religious environment, it never really touched me.
Mm.
Meeting her was the opening to a whole new world.
Mm.
She lives in a magnificent home with a beautiful garden, and she teaches healing
Mm.
and all kinds of things. She
Mm-hmm.
teaches life.
Uh-huh.
So this was a big turning point for me, was finding a role model that really sparked something.
Mm. So, because before that, you weren't really taking anything in particular, or were you receiving counseling, or were you seeking any kind of help for the depression and the different
Yeah,
stages?
yeah. I had actually a really wonderful therapist for a long time. I was on different medications, but I felt very compromised by that.
I
But
see.
I was receiving help. Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Um,
Okay, so
so this was, yeah,
you're in the garden and
I'm
you're,
in the garden.
yes.
And once I reached the garden, my orientation changed because I just realized right away that I need to be in nature. There's no question about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a compromise that I'm willing to make anymore. This is just what I need.
Mm.
Um, and from that point on, my ex-husband and I, it grew further and further apart
Mm.
because he wanted to be in the city. He wanted to be connected to his teachers and his community. And I just wanted to be in nature, and I wanted to take my children with me out into the nature, to take them out of school, to rewild.
Mm. Wonderful. Uh-huh. So when you said that she did different kinds of healings, was there some kind of modality that you then became involved with nature or herbs or something else?
Yeah, yeah, all of it. I changed my whole diet under her guidance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I began to do a lot of deep cleansing. I did a 2 week juice fast, and then I did a 3 day water fast, and then I did some other different cleanses. And then we moved out of the city as a family because I wanted to live closer to her.
Uh-huh.
And I started to actually study with her. And she teaches how to heal the body organ by organ. So she would teach us about the liver and all the herbs and foods and colors and movements that nurture this organ, and then all the things that can harm it.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, she was teaching us a very deep wisdom about the emotional aspect and the spiritual aspect about each part of our body.
Uh-huh.
And ultimately, she likes to say that the cleaner your body is, the more comfortable your soul feels to be there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of a process of refinement and tuning in and listening deeply to that inner voice in a truer way.
Mm. Well, I can only imagine that that must have been really powerful for you, given that there was a time when you were, you know, it didn't work, but there was conditioning getting layered on to not trust your body, and there's something wrong with it and shameful about it. So here you could do some things to kind of clear the organs and the emotional system, and then treat it like a temple, like really an honoring of your body. So that must have
Yeah,
been really powerful, giving the earlier environment that you were part of, that was
yeah,
asking you to cover your body up and not really trust it, and there might be something wrong with it. And then to just be so deeply engaged with every part of your body, all the organs, the emotions, the ground, the earth, everything around you. And then,
yeah. And
go ahead.
I think that yeah, when you say to that our body is a temple, this is really what this is how it is, and this is what I was learning at the time. And um, one of the things that I'm so grateful to this teacher for is that she saw something in me that I wasn't aware of at all. And as I began to study with her, I started to realize that actually I have the ability to look inside of my body the same way I did when I was pregnant, and could actually feel and see the child growing, I can see all the organs in my body. I can see everything that's going on inside of me. And there's so much power and beauty and significance to that, that
Mm.
there's something sacred in the body and um, in showing up for the body and the body showing up for us.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Um, yeah, so this was a very, and actually my ex-husband was also very excited about it and engaged,
Uh-huh.
but not to the degree that I was. For him, he just really needed something more conventional, something more in the middle, whereas I was just
Mm.
ready for a completely new path. And eventually, we went our separate ways. And one of the things that happened, as you mentioned in the introduction, about my passion for fertility, is that in the last maybe year and a half, 2 years of my marriage, I had stopped menstruating completely.
Mm.
And I was actually working with my teacher on using different herbs and tracking and creams and hormones to try to get it back, because a healthy young woman's body should be having regular menstruation,
Mhm.
and
That,
nothing worked.
yeah, remind us of how old you were at that time then, when the
I was 28, 29.
yeah, so that's unusual. Mhm.
Very unusual. And we really tried everything. I had almost given up. I was like, well, I don't know. I just don't know. And my teacher would always tell us, there's an emotional component to every physical ailment, and there's a spiritual aspect to every ailment. And it happened to be that immediately after we separated, the very next day, I was out in the forest taking a walk, and my period came back
Wow.
just in a single moment. And I was out in nature, and I realized that there was a certain struggle that I was engaged in during all the years of my marriage and mothering in a way, from a very depleted place.
Mhm.
And the creativity, which for me is symbolized by a fertile body, just wasn't there anymore.
Mm.
It was like my body was telling me, no, this is not the time for creativity. I'm not ready to give more, to do more, to produce more. And then once I had made that very big decision to split from my ex-husband, there was a relief that happened and a release that happened. And at the same time that I was returning to that inner voice of trusting myself and taking care of myself, I was also returning to live close to the earth and taking care of her and receiving nourishment from her.
Mm.
So that, yeah, a moment of
Wow. That's so
celebration.
beautiful. Let's underline that. Let's really underline that for a moment, because this is really so much of what the healing and the wisdom of the womb is. And what I love about what you said is this integrative approach that this teacher offered to you. And it seems like it was very natural to you. You were called to it anyway, but it didn't separate things out. So it really integrated the emotions with everything happening in the body. And then noticing in your lifestyle was very stressful at that time and challenging, and that impacted the body. And just in that very difficult decision, I'm sure, to make the separation, because whenever there are children involved, it's never an easy decision. But just in making that decision and then returning back to the forest and being held by the earth, the your menstruation began again. And but what I'm hearing from listening to you throughout all of this conversation is this connection, this connectivity to something that's very authentic and natural inside of you, very intelligent. And so often in different circles of all kinds, there can be a disconnection where You just focus here on the mind or the intellect, or focus on the body, or not focus on the body, but to find a ground, a practice, a teaching that includes and integrates all of it and honors the fertility and the wisdom and the intelligence in the body. And what you said is your creativity, there was a period of feeling very drained, but after that, your creativity started to return as well. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it took time. It did
Uh-huh.
take time,
Uh-huh.
and actually, what happened was, um, like you mentioned in the beginning, I had a very profound spiritual awakening, which also happened in nature, around a fire with music and beautiful people supporting me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and one of the things that became, a spiritual awakening is, there aren't really words to describe it, but it was very clear to me that I am not in control of my life, and I never have been.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there is nothing but surrender, whether I like it or not. And I began to understand that I really needed to take a step back from everything that I was doing to deeply reconnect with myself. And that included my own children.
Uh-huh.
And there was actually a line in your book where you spoke about, going off in your car to listen to, a satsang, and you said something like, I needed to take space from my family in order to nourish myself and return to them
Mm.
with the energy that's really required to take care of children, which is such a selfless activity. So that's really what was happening for me at the time,
Mm-hmm.
um, in a very big way. And I made an arrangement with my ex-husband that the children were going to stay with him for a certain amount of time, and I was going to take a little vacation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this was really the time when my creativity started to return and my connection with myself. Um, I had a lot of, exploring to do,
Mm.
and, experimenting. I had been raised in a very kind of narrow environment and been through many years of suppression.
Mm-hmm.
And by age 30, it was almost like a new teenager for me. It was like, okay, this is my time. Um, and that was really when, like, the depression and the really deep, suicidal tendencies just vanished completely, because in the awakening, it just became, apparent that there's not, we're free, that I'm free,
Mm.
that there's nothing to escape from. Everything is whole, even if it's imperfect. And that certain piece that I had as a very young child kind of blossomed into a full understanding that even if it doesn't appear this way always, actually all is well,
Mm.
and there's nothing to worry about.
Mm-hmm. And you say that even though that wasn't like experienced at all times, I remember in one of your writings, you said it was like the beginning of something. But I
Yeah.
want to even step back there too, because it's something that gets missed so often in our spiritual cultures, around the way of women. You know, the way of women is not really written about very often. You know, a lot of our spiritual practices are written by men and for men. And there isn't the richness of what happens in a woman's body. So, in my perception of just listening to you and receiving you and then honoring my own experience, I would say that going out into the forest and the return of your menstruation was an awakening, a very profound spiritual awakening that in the normal context of spiritual awakening would not be called that. But just by what you said, because awakening, what does it do? It returns us to the fabric of existence, which is interconnected with all things. You know, it's just like it uncovers something that is quite natural to us, like our menstruation or giving birth, parenting. All of these things are very natural to us, falling in love, having our hearts broke open. And this doesn't often make it into the books. And I just want to underline that for all of us and for our listeners, that we can kind of gloss over very significant experiences in our life that are portals to the depth of who we are in our essence and in our humanity. So you continued on from there. And so things just continued to open and open and open. And what I remember from your story is this is also what happens is as we're unfolding was there was a great release of grief. Is that right? There was tears and there was opening, and I remember somebody put their hand on your back. I had a very same experience with I went to a satsang somewhere in Berkeley with a particular teacher that I had heard about, and this was in the midst of an ongoing dark night that I had felt because I couldn't find anyone that I could really relate my experience to as a woman with children with disabilities and with needing to navigate that terrain on my own. So I felt very disconnected, even though prior to then I had had pretty profound awakenings in the what is often considered more of a patriarchal approach, like which would be approved by the patriarchy in non-dual spirituality. But there was much more happening, much more happening. But anyways, there was a very intuitive and body-centered teacher, Isaac Shapiro, who really, he's actually from South Africa originally also. And he's very embodied and just is always about sensation, not about knowing, but what's happening in your body. So I sat in that satsang and I sat in the back because I didn't really want people to see me in the state that I was in. But he noticed me and he had me stay around till afterwards, and we went outside and we sat outside and didn't really talk or anything, but it was just such an amazing gesture of kindness where he put his hand on my back, which I remember reading in your story. And then there was just this floodgate of tears that came, and it was the grief. And it was the grief, for me, it felt like I was grieving the loss of connection. Like it was in the terrain I was living in. I didn't know what I could connect with. And just that gesture, and also it was cold out and he put his wool sweater over me. And just that tender kindness was such a release where I was able to then, in the way that you expressed, reconnect to something very, very authentic. So let's hear what you have to say about that, because I think this is really important for all bodies to hear, but specifically the way of women that doesn't really get called out and honored.
Yeah. Well, the grief in my story was actually about motherhood, and the love of a mother is so profound and all encompassing, and at the same time we never get it perfectly right. So there's pain inherent in motherhood, and actually there's pain inherent in every relationship. There's always a falling short in some way, and actually there's a mourning that's present with us in the human level of the things that we wish could have been different somehow. And to deny that is just falsehood, because this is part of the human experience, that we would love everything to be just perfect and rosy and loving all of the time. And the fact that it isn't generates a certain amount of grief and mourning. And to be really authentic means to acknowledge that and express that and allow that mourning as well to present itself as it is, and to contain that for what it is and allow that to transform into something else.
Mm-hmm.
And in my situation, the grief was so deep. And it took a really long time to let all of that out. And once I was able to really grieve for the mother that I wished I could have been when I couldn't, then I was able to actually see my children for who they really were and are, and to make space for myself to, first of all, really nourish myself and take care of myself and create for myself a new life, and to return to them with the energy that I wanted to, and really be able to be that benevolent presence for them that I was so much yearning to be. But it was a very difficult process because in the arrangement I had with my ex-husband, he would have custody over them temporarily. Meanwhile, I went, actually, I left the country. I was in a yoga school for a month. I did some other things. And when I came back, he had remarried to a very religious woman with a daughter of her own. And they had kind of formulated their own little bubble. And it seems that it was just very difficult for him to contain his new life and also to continue holding an open space for my presence in the life of the children. And he just wanted to cut me out of the picture. He preferred that I would have very limited access to them. So when you were speaking in your introductory talk about the emergency C-section that you went through, this is kind of a pattern of patriarchal domination that is very deeply embedded in the conditioning of the illness of our culture, that there is a space for force.
A space for, say it again, a space for
force.
Yes.
As opposed to containing, understanding, working with.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So
holding.
So I was on the receiving end of this energy, not only from my ex-husband, but also from the courts, because I went to court to fight for custody of my children, to fight for the right to choose what schools my children would be in, because we had an agreement that they wouldn't go to very religious schools. I didn't want that for them. And he had done it anyway. So there were a lot of different issues going on. And you know, spiritual awakening is such a transcendental experience, but reality doesn't disappear, and the challenges of everyday life don't disappear.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of wanted to be a monk and just disappear into my cave, but life said otherwise, and I was really thrown into the boxing ring over this issue, because there was no way I was going to just give up custody of my children. Mm-hmm. And it meant having to go to court and deal with social workers and come face to face with this part of our culture, which is so domineering and calculated. For example, I had to have social workers interview me, check my home, ask all kinds of questions to determine whether I am a fit mother.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a very patriarchal and domineering kind of approach. And it was very shocking for me and very, very difficult for me. I had a very deep pain over the fact that there was no space for understanding and support. For example, the fact that I didn't have a stable job, maybe that's an invitation for the social workers to say, okay, let's help this wonderful mom to find financial stability. Instead, it's something to judge and hold against me. And I came up again and again against this experience. But actually, on the deeper level, what it was really teaching me is not to define myself according to my financial abilities or whether I have a good enough home or a good enough whatever, that I am enough. And to know very deeply that I am the mother of these children that can never be replaced in any way, and that even my prayers and my love for them from afar is hugely significant and nourishing.
Yes.
And then during this time, I had another really wonderful teacher that came into my life. She is an energetic healer, and she did incredible work with me, and at the same time also taught me about what it means to be on my side. So this was like the completion of the lesson that in my childhood I had kind of had this conflict of, can I trust myself, or are there these external rules that are really important? And she really has a very sharp wisdom, and she made it so clear to me that you have got to be on your own side. If you want to really win this battle and have equal rights to mother your children, this is what it's going to take. It's going to really take for you to trust yourself completely. And in order to transform your external circumstance, the only way to do it is from inside of yourself. That is the only way that it can happen. And he really taught me how to set intentions and how to access our guardian angels and ancestors that are actually present and supporting us and celebrating us, and how to trust in our inner power.
Wonderful. So trusting your inner power. So then, so when you finished up with the courts, you did end up regaining at least partial custody, or
well,
you have a schedule now, is that correct?
So now the schedule is it's changing as the children grow older, but it's very fair, it's very balanced. And actually the way that the breakthroughs really happened weren't even through the courts, because it was so clear to me that this is like the most cold-hearted atmosphere that I could possibly engage in, and not really a place that I'm gonna make progress. But there were other ways, like this woman, this healer, was teaching me how to create the change from the inside, and then opportunities showed up in other ways, and the doors opened.
That is such a great teaching and a beautiful message. When you do your inner work and you call on that inner strength, and I love how you said the strength of the ancestors, and bring all of that forward and have a really clear intention that carves out a way that you may not have even imagined. So more doors open and more doors open. And there was something that you said earlier that I also just wanted to kind of underline and maybe just explore for a moment, about spirituality being about, or awakening. I can't remember exactly how you said it, but about a transcendent state. And well, we know, and that that's part of it, that may be one aspect of awakening, and that you could call that an awakening, but it isn't liberation. So awakening is really the beginning of an unfoldment. And what you had said to me earlier was that really where you felt the unfolding happened the most, like right here in your own inner work, but in your life as a parent, where the spiritual rubber, so to speak, really hits the road, and where you, I mean, there isn't anything more challenging for most people would agree with this, I think, than being a parent. You know, I don't even think it matters how many children, because you really are asked to give up your personal will on a moment to moment, day to day basis. Now, if you add the challenge of the, you know, the whoever the other partner is, whether you be together or apart, you have your whole family system is right there with you at that time. And if there's anything that isn't resolved from your earlier family, it will often then come again in your new family. You know, if we haven't dealt with it or resolved it, we bring it with us. And when spiritual awakening is authentic, it gives us an opportunity to meet these aspects of who we are in our day-to-day living. So let's just, we're going to need to start coming to a close pretty soon, but let's, excuse me, let's hear about how you found this really profound awakening to be able to assist you in the day-to-day parenting role.
Well, one of the things I think that is characteristic of an awakening experience is that the veils are lifted, meaning the conditioning can be perceived.
Yes.
So once the conditioning can be perceived, then suddenly, for example, I would find myself in an interaction with one of my children, and I would really be noticing in an absolutely clear way that I'm playing out a certain conditioning. And once that's seen, it disappears. Suddenly, there's a space instead where I can actually um, listen to whatever really wants to express itself, which is something really loving and fresh and new. That's not some old trauma. Um, and it's ongoing. This is really ongoing. Each of our children is different and they go through different stages and we go through different stages, and it takes a lot of work in terms of keeping ourselves on the ball. It's there's nothing automatic about it.
It sounds like you're saying,
Obviously,
it sounds like you're saying as you see the conditioning, you're, rather than reacting, like when there's reaction, there's, you know, a trauma response perhaps is triggered. So rather than that, it sounds like you're able to have a different response come forward because the conditioning is being able to be seen and met and cleared and softened so that you can respond from something that's embodied, you know, something
yeah,
natural, something natural.
exactly. Yeah. I think there's a lot of definitions that we have about what a mother is supposed to say or do or look like.
Mm,
Um, and reality can be very, very different than that. I find myself often just not knowing, just having no idea what to respond.
mm-hmm.
Sometimes that's really where it's at, and there's just silence. And it can take a few days until I formulate some sort of um, helpful, loving response to the situation.
Oh, that's really great that you're saying that, because so heavily in our conditioning through school and through society and everywhere is to know what to do, to have an answer right away, and to really get in the fixing mode of moving ahead and moving ahead. I know that was really strong in me, and being a parent has definitely unraveled that, because other people are involved then. It's not just about you. You know, like if we stumble along and we make a mistake and we're injured and some harm happens, or whatever pattern or behavior we're engaged in and something happens to us, that's one thing. But then when our family and our children are involved, it seems to have a different kind of resonance. And that that love, that inborn love wants to teach us, it wants to allow something different to happen. And like you said, there's a listening. So I remember for me, it took a long time for me to just stop and say, I don't really know right now what to do, how to handle this, and let that be okay. To
Yeah.
give ourselves permission not to know, because you can read all the books. Oh, I read so many books. Oh, like shelves on so many different things around everything that you have to make a decision about as a parent. Vaccines, what schools to go to, what kind of parenting approach, nursing, everything. And I and I, at a certain point, I had to just like set all of that aside and just listen, because all of our situations are so unique. Every child is unique, and we have certain basic needs for sure, the attachment, and then to be able to have an authentic response and to be supported in that. And then there's everything else that fluctuates on a day-to-day basis. And to be able to, just in life alone, to be able to say, let me think about that. I don't really know. Oh, and it's okay not to know. And like you
And
said, it could
same,
take 3 days, it could take a week.
yeah. And at the same time, this is such a powerful message to give over to one's children, that they can be safe to not know.
Mm-hmm.
And it's happened to me often that actually the answer comes from the children. They have wonderful ideas or resolve things on their own. And it's just a further a deepening of the understanding that we don't really know. I don't really know, and I don't have to know.
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad that you said that, because children are so intelligent and they're so sensitive and innocent, and they haven't, received, hopefully, yet. It happens, and every situation is different, but all the different layers of conditioning. But when they're able to really be listened to, they do know so much, but it's not a heady thing. It's not something that's learned. I remember, I want to share a quick story. Is You met my daughter Abby, and many people that listen to me know, my story and Edge of Grace, and my twins are now, they just turned 24. So Abby, she is unstoppable. They were born at 1 pound each. You know the story. But she had a significant brain injury that affected the midbrain, which affects one side of her body. So her movements aren't always coordinated, and she didn't learn to walk until she was 6. So she has more tone in the right side of her body. So she uses her left side for most everything. But she is determined to, she learned to walk. She was determined to walk, climb stairs. Vision came in late for her. Everything is still coming, but it's a developmental delay. And we've done all kinds of things to support that. But most of it is what she wants. There's a determination in her. But anyways, at a certain time, she started to become self-conscious. That came in late. Like, we all get that. Like, when self-consciousness comes in, it's almost like that's the side of the ego that it can be challenging, self-consciousness, and where that critical voice starts to develop, and we start to shy away from life, and self-concern and all of that happens. Well, it happened late for her, and she started to not want to dance publicly because she'd say, everybody is staring at me. Whereas prior to that, she would always dance like nobody was watching, even though she would be off a little bit and not quite, in step with everyone else. She was having the time of her life always. And many people would come to performances. They would tell me, anyways, we come just to watch Abby, because she's just like puts her whole heart and soul into it. So, anyways, the other day, just yesterday, she was going to make up a dance class and was excited about it, because most of the classes during the pandemic that we're in now had been happening on Zoom. So now they're having small classes, everybody wears a mask. And so she was going, and she had missed 2 classes, so she had a makeup to do. So she wanted to take this other class 2 in a row. So she was able to take the first class. And then the second class, they said, this isn't your level, you can't take it. So when I picked her up, she was sitting in the waiting room, and, then she lifted her head, and I mean, she, it was just like, she looked like really just sad, And so I took her out to the car, and she can be very articulate and she's not going to stop until she has told you everything, right? So she said, Mom, I took the first class, and, it was with kids more my age, like, even that she's 24, but she thinks of teenagers as her age. And she said, and for the first time in the longest time, nobody was staring at me. And it felt so good that nobody was staring at me and I could just be myself. And she was lit up when she was speaking. And then she said, I wanted to go in the next class, and they said it wasn't my level. And she said, I was smiling so big, my whole body was smiling. And then my smile was gone. And I was sitting there waiting for you, and I just wanted to cry. And so I was talking to her, and I'm like, well, I'm so glad that you got to have that experience. And I said, what do you think happened? And she said, I don't know, but maybe it's the little children don't know that they're not supposed to stare at me, because usually she's with younger children. And I said, yeah, maybe as people mature a little bit, they start to mind their own business and just let you be who you are. And she said, I don't know, but it felt really good not to be stared at. And then she said, but you know what? I know in my heart I can do it. I want to keep going to that class. Even if they say it's not my level, I know in my heart I can do it. And that's it. That's it. Like, we know in our hearts. And for her, and any of us, as long as we're paying attention to our hearts, like, her body might not be able to follow, but she's not willing to give up, and that self-concern is starting to fall away. And I want to get back to what you have to say, but I think that this is like really super key in awakening how heart-centered it is. Like, we know in our hearts, in our bodies, who we are and what we lean toward. Our leaning toward is engagement, is living, is aliveness, is celebration, is dancing, is expressing, is all of these things. And what gets in the way of that, just like I've noticed in her development, because I got to watch it, is this self-censoring that comes in. This kind of self-concern, this interpretation, and then the identification, all the different ways then make that our identity, and then feel the limitation of the identification that we then hold on to because we believe it. So what I hear so beautifully, and I see, for her, I would even say that moment in the dance class where she could feel herself, free to be herself without being censored by herself or by anyone in the environment. That sense of safety and freedom in her body and in her heart, that was for her an awakening, for however long it was. And then some other voice came in and said, oh, we can't let you have this because you're not at the level of the society of the society of enabled bodies, ableism. It's like, no, you need a body that functions like this. And it's another part of this whole dismantling in our cultures, in our societies, in our communities that is happening, where we can really consider, are we being inclusive? Like, I know there's something about a dance class or something like that, for people to feel safe, where if somebody isn't moving at the same pace, an injury could happen. But we really hold up these models of bodies and behaviors, and even like you said, mothering, like what a mother looks like, what, like we can have these pictures of what that looks like, and we can, and so much of that is the white man. Like if the white man said it, it must be true. And how that comes into everything with Black lives, with people of culture, it comes into everything. And wow, how unnecessary it is. Like, all right, well, I said enough. I want to hear from you, but that was like this is just an ordinary experience, but an important one that happens for so many people. And this is also what you're unfolding in your own life story as a mother.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate listening to you. And I really appreciate Abby. Such a beautiful shining light. Um, there was something that I thought about that you reminded me of when you were speaking, which is a project that I'm working on around premenstrual syndrome, what people call PMS, because it's the natural cycle of a woman is that there's a time of the month where she can get pregnant and her body is in full creative flowering. And she feels physically well, she feels emotionally well, she feels ecstatic, she feels excited and creative. And when that egg isn't fertilized, so there's a process that begins in the body where the egg begins to disintegrate. And this is what people call PMS, which is a syndrome that's characterized by um, depression or anger, lethargy, physical pains. And I spent so many years of my life judging that very natural process and trying to control it with pills or even with herbal remedies. Whereas actually, there's such a deep beauty in that process, because when the egg is disintegrating and we start to notice the things around us that are decomposing, this is just as perfect as the blissful creative moments. Same as the transcendental aspect of awakening and then the embodiment of awakening. It's part of the balance, and there is no use in trying to uh, make the body into a standardized experience all month long. So
And then pathologize it.
exactly, and treat it as a problem. Um, like you say, the white man, with an expectation for women to be able to function the way a man does. It's it's so sad. So I have a real deep wish and dream and vision that one day we'll return to living in nature and in a tribal way, and that there's a space for women to go when they're experiencing the death aspect of existence, where they can go and do that really deep dive inside, because that's naturally where we're pulled during that time of the month. And each and every month inside of that process, the new egg is actually being born. And there's a certain pearl of wisdom that's uncovered when we really allow ourselves to go deep into that process. And in my vision, the woman is allowed to go into her space and she emerges with this pearl of wisdom as an offering for her family and for the whole tribe, as the direction and the inspiration for the new month, that she's the channel for that and she's given the space for that to happen. So I've actually, here in the farm where we live, created a space that's dedicated to that process for myself. And I've invited my sisters, who I'm so blessed with, to use that space as well. And I think that the way that change happens for ourselves and in the world is through these small acts. Once one person does it, suddenly it makes it easier for that to happen everywhere else. Or maybe someone else did it, and that's how I received the idea myself. But one thing is for sure, this attitude of control and domination, that's an era that's gone. It's not, it's dying out. The
Yes.
change that is happening now is actually coming from this fertile ground of the womb, which is a really organic and compassionate, embodied, transformational wisdom.
Yes.
That's where we're at.
Yes. And which is not separate from the womb of the earth. You know, she is the earth. Yes. Oh, that is, I think that this is a wonderful way to start to bring it to a closing note. And I just want to appreciate so much the ending part there of your story, that especially the part of saying, you know, this kind of transformation and change and really reconnecting to our bodies and to the earth. It doesn't have to happen in these, you know, huge gatherings, but just one circle, one small circle at a time, because it's the feeling into the intimacy and the, you know, like that slowing down and that way of pausing and listening and feeling and sensing that anchors us more, not only in our bodies, but to that natural connection to the earth. You know, and I think you probably see this in your children, how lucky they are to grow up on a farm is most of the time anyways, to have this natural connection to nature. And I see that all the time. My first child was fortunate to be part of a Waldorf school, and we developed a Waldorf school here in our home for some typical children, as well as children who had differently abled bodies, like my twins. And we created a program here because just in watching children myself, seeing that we naturally connect to nature, we learn how to disconnect. Like, connection is natural to us. And when we have that connection to nature, to farming, to growing our own food, to, you know, feeling our feet on the earth, to resting and laying down in her arms, and the way that you spoke about the Dead Sea is kind of symbolic of of a um a womb, you know, and you kind of, the Dead Sea, I've been there once, and you're just held and you can float in the embrace of the warm.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Tamar, do you have any closing remarks you'd like to make?
Yeah, there was something that I thought about. There's this teaching in the Jewish tradition about the fetus in the womb, which speaks about the fetus as having a candle or a lamp above their head. And with this light, they can see from one end of the world to the other. This is what's written in the text. And the Kabbalah explains that they are in a state where their body and soul haven't yet been fused. So they still have access to the most pure spiritual wisdom. And what happens at the moment of birth is that the body and soul become interconnected in a way that the wisdom is no longer accessible. But the purpose of this experience is that as the child lives their life, when they come across truth and wisdom and the sacred, there's a certain sense of familiarity because they actually already know it. We already know the truth, and we already have experienced the most blissful light of wisdom. So to be a woman and have a womb and be blessed with children is such an incredible gift. And the power of the fertile feminine is actually accessible to all of us. It's accessible to all women and to all men. And the balance between the outpouring of energy that is more masculine and the containing and transforming of energy that is more feminine is something that we can all work to balance inside of ourselves and bring forward into the world in this new kind of womb wisdom that we're very lucky to be a part of.
Oh, beautifully said. Yeah, I really like how we don't have to identify with feminine or masculine being about a certain body, with a gender, but that these are energies or archetypes or ways of being that are universal to all of us. And unfortunately, throughout history, it's been a bit lopsided. And I think we're allowing and welcoming and inviting the feminine strength as well as softness and the fertility of the feminine, the creativity and the holding of all of that to come forward. And when that can be balanced with a healthy masculine guidance, because the masculine energy is also incredibly necessary and valuable and needed, that gives some structure and some guidance and some holding. Like, they say in Waldorf education that in the first 7 years that the mothering, the caregiving of the mother, or the nourishment of a body, whether it be whoever it is, that's really, really important in the first 7 years. And these days we kind of get modernized so quickly and taken out of the home, but that the environment is so important because it also has so much to do with then how the brain develops. And those first 7 years is just and it goes so fast. I mean, if I could do that over again with what I know now. But what I was going to say is then the masculine, that is the father, or the masculine often is, in the form of the father, at least in a family, has been historically the one who holds the little boy or the little girl or whatever is they identify in their body, holds the hand into the world. And that's what allows for it's like crossing over a bridge into the first degree of independence, not full independence, but where you're stepping away out of home a bit into your own autonomy and your own hopeful confidence. If things went well, and we all know that that doesn't always happen. But I just wanted to underline the value of both feminine and masculine in all bodies in the way that you said it. Beautiful. Yay! Well, I don't know how long we went, but it's been great, and you'll probably be on the show again another time. It'd be great to have you. It's really lovely to collect voices from all different cultures, all different walks of life, and that maybe haven't been heard yet, and giving an opportunity to express. So thank you for all of your wisdom as a mother, as a guide, actually, really, for others, and for your authentic expression and vulnerability, the depth of all that you've shared, and really just living your journey, just like really going full out with it. That's what I get from it. It's like the showing up through some pretty tough challenges, and just to keep showing up for that. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So wonderful to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to just give expression to one life that really it's all of our story.
Yes.